see so many women commenting, if only someone had told me I could do it, my child would have been 5 years old, or 10 years old, or 15 years old.
Welcome to Straight Talk on Life Issues. I'm Victor Nieves, joined as always by Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute. And today we're going to be having a very impactful conversation on a really important topic, and that is rape, sexual assault, and pregnancies.
You know, Victor, the lies that the other side put out is absolutely appalling and shocking in many ways. Women are told, women who have become pregnant as a result of sexual assault, I think some of them, many of them are perhaps well-meaning, but they tell the woman that she will see the rapist's face every time she looks at her child. She will relive that awful experience of the assault every time she looks at that baby. And that simply is not true.
No, it's not true. It's just another one of the many examples of how pro-abortion advocates will often weaponize this conversation because, Brad, as you and I both know, it's not a comfortable conversation to have. This is something that it's easier to just ignore, but we can't do that. We simply cannot ignore this experience. And the pro-abortion advocates have not ignored it. They've weaponized it. They've used it as something that they can try and leverage to convince more people that abortion needs to be on demand without really any restrictions whatsoever. And I find that completely abhorrent.
You know, and our own side, I think, neglects to look at the importance of what women face who have been raped and pregnant. You know, so often we promote legislation, and in many times, sad to say, the default is protecting the unborn except for the cases of rape and incest. And that is an abhorrent position to take. Of course, you know, we need to save every baby we can. So we pass the legislation that will protect the most and go back and continue to work at that until all babies are saved. But we should never start from the point of view of tossing victims of rape, the children that were conceived by rape, under the bus. We just have to change that.
It's absolutely right. And, you know, today we're going to hear some extremely impactful testimonies from two very special women. First joining us is Nancy Kelly. She's been outspoken about choosing life for her twins that were conceived through rape and her abortion recovery journey through the Alabama State House. She spoke for Students of Life. Her story's been published by the Epoch Times in several different languages in several different countries. She's an oncology chemotherapy nurse, a mother of 7, grandmother of 6, and she's a follower of Jesus Christ. We'll also hear touching testimony from Angela Harders, who is a strong pro-life advocate, an international best-selling author, the founder of PAX Academy, and similar to Nancy, she has got such a heart-touching story about her experience and as it relates to this very, very important topic. So very appreciative of these two guests for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure.
I'd like to direct a question to both of you. We'll start with you, Angela. Can you briefly tell us your story?
Sure. I was born and raised in Maryland, and my father was actually the vice president of a local pregnancy center. I have been very, very pro-life ever since I was young. However, when I was in my 20s, I found myself facing an unplanned pregnancy after being raped. And my gut reaction was to actually schedule an appointment with Planned Parenthood. Even though I was very pro-life, I felt like that was my only option. I was terrified and scared. And so I called and made an appointment with Planned Parenthood, and they made me book the appointment a couple days out. And I'm so grateful for that because during that time period, it gave me time to really think and reflect. And I had an appointment scheduled for Friday. On a Wednesday night, I called a pregnancy center in New York, a random center in New York. And I had a conversation with a woman on the pregnancy center call. And she basically just kind of sat with me. When she answered the phone, I was crying, and she said, honey, just take your time. I'm here on the call with you. And I said, okay. And as soon as I kind of collected myself enough to be able to talk, I shared with her about what had happened and how I had scheduled an appointment for an abortion that Friday, and I wasn't sure what to do. And the words that she spoke to me completely changed my life. And she said, sex doesn't make babies, God does. And that truth just hit me like a ton of bricks. The reality that there are women all over the world that are having sex, hoping to have babies, and yet for some reason they don't. And she said, for some reason, God is choosing to give you life out of this terrible circumstance. And immediately I just felt a complete peace cover me. And I knew that what she was saying was true, that God had a plan and a purpose even for this. And so that Friday morning, I actually called and canceled my appointment with Planned Parenthood. And the lady who answered that phone had a very different response to what I was saying. And her response was immediately speaking to the fear that I had been feeling. She was actually the same person that took my call when I had booked the appointment the first time. And she said, Angela, if you go through with this, you will never be able to travel. You will never be able to be a missionary as a single mom. You'll never be able to fulfill the plans that God has for you. This is a problem that we can take care of for you, and no one will ever have to know. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. She's trying to use my faith against me to actually convince me to have an abortion by saying that this is part of God's plan for me and entice me to put my own dreams and my own goals above God's plan and God's will. And I said, no, no one would never know. I would know, and God would know. And I'm canceling this appointment. And I hung up the phone. And so that day I chose to keep my baby that was conceived in rape. And and now my baby is 9 years old.
We'll get back to you a little bit about your precious child. Nancy, can you tell us your story briefly?
So I had quite a few situations of sexual abuse when I was a child, and led me to a lot of promiscuity, especially after my divorce. I had had 2 abortions nearly 1 year apart, and found myself after a date rape pregnant. I hid it for a long time. I was in denial. It wasn't true. And I went to the doctors that I had my previous children with, and she said, something's wrong. Something doesn't feel right. I need you to go get an ultrasound. I worked at Johns Hopkins at the time, and during my lunch break, I went and had an ultrasound. The ultrasound technician saw the twins. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. And she stepped out and sent in one of the doctors. And this doctor told me that I was having twins and how far along I was, and said, I'm not supposed to do this, but we can arrange a weekend at the hospital for something, and we can take care of it for you. She was basically offering me a late term illegal abortion. And I was like, I just saw 2 heartbeats. How could I possibly do that? I can't. And there were similar things that were said to me. Angela was told that it was terrible, and you were always going to look at the face of these babies and see a rapist. But I chose life for my children, and my twins, I didn't save them. They saved me.
How would you say, you said they saved you? Tell us how.
I know, because I was a victim of sexual abuse as a child, what that does to you. Your life means nothing to you. There are plenty of times where rape victims try to end their lives because they cannot get past that pain. But I had these 2 beautiful faces that gave me purpose beyond the pain. And because of them, the pain, they were my crown for choosing life for them. They were my gift from God. And at the time, I was in a very, very dark place practicing a pagan lifestyle. And through them, eventually, I was introduced to the Lord Jesus Christ. And if it wasn't for them, I don't know if my life would have gone on, but I know I would have never, ever been in the place that I was to be saved.
Yeah. And once Jesus grabs hold of your heart, it's kind of, hold on, here we go, eh?
Amen.
Nancy, you mentioned that your situation was a date rape, so you knew the person who sexually assaulted you, right?
Yes, sir.
How about you, Angela?
Yes, I did know him. He was a relative of a friend of mine.
How would each of you describe your lives after the assault? Angela?
To be honest, this was something that I talked about. It was kind of a whirlwind. I have a lot of PTSD from that moment. There are definitely pieces that I don't remember. I remember the beginning, but I don't remember the actual moment, and I don't remember afterwards going home. And I know that that sounds crazy to a lot of people. I felt like I was going crazy. I don't remember how I got home, but in therapy, my therapist actually shared that that's something very common, that a lot of people that go through trauma experience, that their brain just kind of blocks out what happened. And for a while, that was very frustrating for me because I didn't remember. It was like this blank spot in my memory. But processing that was incredibly difficult, incredibly difficult. I was very depressed. I wasn't able to eat. I was crying all the time. It was terrible.
So yeah, it's no surprise that you blocked out part of that memory because it was so traumatic for you. Nancy, you've
Mhm.
described some of your life after the assault. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I still do have some of those PTSD symptoms. I think the hardest thing for me was shutting down emotionally. My children were born in 2000. And so when the attack on 9/11 happened, I, like everyone else, was desperate to get to my children and worried about what was happening in the world. But I was not able to shed a tear. I couldn't. I had all these emotions that I was not able to get out because I had to suppress them so much because of the PTSD. And there are still times today that I find myself in situations wondering, why can't I cry? I know
Mm.
why, but I know that the Lord heals me, so it's okay.
Nancy, did you discover you were pregnant at that ultrasound, or had you had your pregnancy confirmed earlier?
About 4 days earlier.
So you were fairly far in your pregnancy before it was actually confirmed. Do you credit that then, as you said, to denial?
Yes, absolutely. It was almost 16 weeks by the time I was on that table having an ultrasound.
How about you, Angela?
I actually found out very early. My periods were always very regular. And so when I missed my period, I was like, that's so weird. Maybe I've just been under a lot of stress recently. And so I just thought it was delayed from stress. I was a public school teacher, and it was actually right before the school year started. So we were working long hours trying to get our classroom ready. And one night I had a dream about what had happened, and I had a dream that I was pregnant. And I woke up that morning and I just could not shake that feeling. And I was like, there's no way I could be pregnant. And so during my lunch break at school, I went to the CVS and got a pregnancy test. And as soon as I peed on the stick, it was positive. And I just couldn't leave the bathroom in my classroom. And I just was in complete shock. I called my best friend and I just was totally in shock. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And then after calling my best friend, I called Planned Parenthood.
But in your case, you clearly knew who the father was, right?
Yeah, yes. I grew up in the 1990s during the purity culture in Christianity. My pastor was actually Joshua Harris, the guy who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. So I was very adamant about saving sex for marriage and not dating until you were ready to be married. And so that was something that was very important for me. And I had spoken very openly about that to my students because I taught health class. And so I would talk about the importance of waiting for marriage and not just dating anyone just because you like them, but waiting. And that was part of, I think, the pressure that I felt is, how am I supposed to be the teacher in this public school that's telling students to wait for marriage? They all know that I'm not dating anyone. And then I'm just going to show up one day pregnant. How do I explain that to my students and my colleagues? And so that was a big part of the pressure that I was feeling, to not be perceived as a hypocrite and not be perceived as, a liar to my whole community.
Well, and as you talked about saving yourself for marriage, that is a very, very precious gift. How did you emotionally work through losing that gift?
That was devastating. I think I believed a lot of the lies of the devil, thinking that no man would ever want me because I was tainted now. I think that's a very common response that women have, especially in that idea that, this was something that was taken from me and now I'm not going to be able to give this to my husband. And so that was kind of how I I thought about it afterwards, feeling that way, that no one would want me now.
Well, and Nancy, your situation was different, but the trauma, as you said, was not any less because of that, right?
Oh, absolutely. There were nights that I would wake up screaming or scream in my sleep and wake up my children. And up until the last few years, I still had that very regularly. I left where I was living in Maryland soon after my children were born and moved to Alabama because I was having these delusions that this man was everywhere. And the one time that I did see it, I remember running with my children, and I don't remember anything else.
Yeah, I think it's hard for people who have not been in the experience that the two of you have been to really fathom the depths of how this has impacted you physically and emotionally. I think it's very good for us, certainly for me and for our listeners, to understand a little more of what you went through and are going through.
So, Nancy, you had mentioned that you had had an abortion prior to the sexual assault. What was it that made you choose life for your twins, even with all of the pressure and the sketchy offer from the hospital? What was it that made you choose life?
Actually had 2 abortions, believe it or not. First of all, my second abortion was devastating. I was about 12 weeks, so the procedure was a little different than the first. And they actually place these tubes inside your cervix, and you have to wait a certain amount of time for them to expand because of the size. And at the time of the procedure, I heard a scream. I've heard, no, you didn't. You couldn't have possibly. That was in your head. I've heard people tell me that over and over again. But that was 1991. And to this day, I swear that was a sound that I heard, and I could never do it again.
Do you find, Nancy, the fact that you've had those 2 abortions and the baggage that you carried with those, did that more greatly impact you than with the emotional turmoil of the sexual assault?
Oh, absolutely. It was many years later, after my salvation, that I found a group that is now Abortion Recovery Alabama through my church, and was recommended to go through their Bible study, Forgiven and Set Free, to help me, because abortion trauma, both for the women and even for the men who don't want it to happen, is deeper than you could possibly imagine. And being able to go through that, I was able to realize that I hadn't forgiven myself. And if the Lord can forgive me and I'm not forgiving myself, then I am minimizing what God can do in my life. And that was the biggest moment to be able to get past that. Women and men take this in depths of their heart that they don't even realize, because the fact of the matter is, just because you didn't have the baby doesn't mean that you're not a mother. And there are so many places that women can go to find that healing, and it's so necessary.
What was the healing process like for you, Nancy, to recover from the rape? And what was the turning point for you?
There were probably 3 or 4 times that my friend had said, you really should do this program. You really should do this program. And I fought it and I fought it and I fought it. But I found that my children were suffering because I was so depressed and having such a difficult time. So I decided to start going through the program. Kind of stayed off to myself at first. And I think my huge breakthrough, they have these little plastic babies that are the size of a baby at different times in your pregnancy. And they gave one to everyone, and everyone picked it up. And it was on my table, and I couldn't even look at it.
Oh.
And at the moment I touched it, I just crumbled. And that was the moment that I realized that there was so much more to the trauma that I had imposed upon myself that I didn't even realize. I discovered through that time that when other people had babies, I was like, oh, they're so cute, but I didn't want to touch them. And I didn't understand why. And it was through that program that gave me that release to be truly, as it was called, forgiven and set free.
Angela, I'd like to go back to you. What was your healing process like, and what was the turning point for you?
I think the day that I chose to cancel my abortion appointment was a huge turning point in my healing journey. I truly believe that God, we say all the time that God works all things together for the good. And it's a nice thing to say, we slap it on coffee cups and t-shirts, like God works all things together for good. But when you're facing a situation that you truly feel like this is going to be the death of me, this is going to destroy my life. And when you can be in that situation and still choose to see, okay, God, what is the good that you're giving me out of this? What is the good that you're going to work from this? Choosing to keep my daughter was that turning point for me. And being able to take this situation that for so many women becomes devastating and depressing and full of hatred and bitterness. Instead, I was having this life that was filling me with life and hope and joy and faith. And it was very interesting to try to balance that. There was this one sense that I was very much grieving, but at the same time, I also wanted to be able to feel free to celebrate this baby. You know, she was my baby. Wasn't coming in the way that I had planned by any means, but she was still my baby. And I wanted to be able to celebrate her life. And so I think having her was really helpful. After she was born, I did go through a lot of therapy afterwards. I had a lot of trauma, I think from PTSD, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares. Those pieces were very difficult for me to deal with. There were a lot of situations that I found myself having panic attacks, which was something I had not experienced before. I have very bad claustrophobia now. I'm not able to be in like enclosed spaces or feel like I'm trapped somewhere is very upsetting for me. So a lot of those kind of residual things I still deal with, and there are different, kind of triggers that come up throughout life, but overall I feel like God has been healing me from that, and praise God I don't experience that as much as I did. But yeah, it is, I think the healing process is something that we just walk through for the rest of our lives. I don't know that there's ever a point where you're like, yes, I'm done. All the healing is done. So there's stuff that comes up, and by God's grace, I process and work through it and move forward. But my daughter definitely was a huge part of healing from that for me.
Yeah, I think that that's a common story we hear from women who chose life for their babies, that their children redeemed them from that horrible act of violence. Angela, as you described your parents and what your dad was doing with the pregnancy center and being steeped in pro-lifeism, if you will, and being part of a very Christian family, were you concerned about how your parents would have reacted to your pregnancy?
I knew that they would never push me to get an abortion because they were so pro-life, but I was very scared to talk with them and tell them about it. To be honest, I did not tell my parents until I was like 5.5 months pregnant. That was kind of just something that I was so scared to have that conversation with them. And so I didn't tell them for a very long time. And people have asked me, how did your parents respond when you first shared this with them? And my mom responded with anger. She was very, very angry, very upset.
Angry at whom or what?
Angry at me. I think that she was angry that I didn't tell her before. I think she was processing her own emotions of, why didn't you tell me? Why did you just kind of suffer with this by yourself for so long? And to be honest, I think that's my biggest regret. I wish that I would have told them sooner. I think that was really hurtful for my mom that I waited so long to tell her about what had happened. So she was very angry and upset about that. My dad, on the other hand, my dad was so wonderful. He stood up from the table and he came over to me, he gave me a big hug, and he said, "We love you. We're here for you. We're going to support you. You are not alone in this. Everything is going to be okay." And to just hear someone say out loud, "Everything is going to be okay," was all that I needed in that moment, for someone to just tell me it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You can do this. We can do this. You're not alone. And my dad just hugged me, and it was such a blessing. They actually let me come back and move. So after my daughter was born, I moved back home. I was living with my friends at the time, but I literally came home from the hospital to my parents' home. And so we got to, my daughter got to grow up with my mom and my dad being in our home for the first couple years of her life. And it was such a blessing to be able to do that, to be able to have that multi-generational home and see how much joy she also brought to my parents, who at that point were, they were older and moving on. And it just, a child just brings so much love and joy to a family. And so it was really special for her to be able to grow up with my mom and my dad and kind of have that father figure, a godly father figure in her home, even if her father wasn't there.
Yeah, we don't have any of our grandchildren living with us, but I know the joy that comes to my heart, even with just changing a diaper. There's that connection that your grandchild needs you and that you're looking forward to spoiling him for the rest of his life. There's so much joy in that, yes, from a grandparent's point of view. How long did it take your mother to work through her anger?
Not very long. My mom really loves the Lord. I don't think it took her very long. She went very quickly, I think, from anger to like, okay, now what? I think one of the other things too that helped was they really did want me to have the freedom to choose. So a couple weeks actually after I shared with them, both my mom and my dad talked with me and they said, would you like to consider adoption? And they both actually offered to adopt my daughter. They said, if you feel like you're not prepared to raise this child on your own, financially, emotionally, whatever, if you feel like you don't want to take that burden, we would be willing to adopt her for you. So, if that's something that you feel like you would need our help with, we could do that. My sister also has a pro-life story as well. She got pregnant when she was in college at 17. And so she had 4 kids of her own, my older sister. And so she also offered, if you don't feel ready to do this, we are more than happy to adopt the baby so she can grow up in our family. But you don't have to feel like the soul, carry that burden right now if you feel like you're not ready for that. And so that was really helpful that they at least gave me the space to really choose, do I want to take this on as my responsibility for the rest of my life? Or, do I want to give my child up for adoption so that she can have a mother and a father and a home and a little bit more stability than what I thought I could provide for her at the time. But I'm really glad that I chose to keep her myself. I knew for myself that if I were to give her up for adoption, even if it was to my parents, I would always wonder, I'd always remain with that what if. And I feel like women are so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for, and we can rise to the occasion. When we're faced with challenges and circumstances, you can do what it takes to be able to survive and to be able to make it and to create the life that you want for yourself. And a baby doesn't have to be a stumbling block for that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a woman say to other women, you can do this.
Yeah.
You are strong. And I think that's a wonderful point of view to share. What was the situation with you telling your family? Nancy?
Well, my parents had already passed on at that point, so I gathered my children together. I had 5 already.
Mm,
So my twins were number 6 and 7.
wow.
And I was a single mom, not a lot of support from their father. And that was a scary thing to tell my children that we're already struggling and now there's going to be 2 more. Of course, they were little. I think my oldest daughter graduated when my twins were 5 or 6 months old, maybe. But they were a little scared and a little, but at the same time, very excited. I didn't have any connection with any of my mother's family at that point. So that was it. That's all I had was my children. And I was not a member of a church anywhere. So that was something I had to do completely on my own with only my kids.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty hard. Victor?
Angela, I'm curious. Your story's so powerful. What was it that made you decide to share it on TikTok? And then when you did you get the reaction that you received? What was the feedback?
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure what inspired me to share that story on TikTok. I had first talked about what had happened to us years earlier at our local pregnancy center. We had a local pregnancy center bake it. That was the first time that I talked about it publicly. But I had never, posted anything like that, like on, TikTok or anything. I was very much surprised by the response that I got. I was not anticipating at all that my story would get over 500,000 views. And I was also very much surprised by the positivity in the response. I feel like we have this perception that the majority of our culture is just everyone's pro-choice. Everyone's pro-choice. And while there were definitely some people who were pro-choice that commented, the overwhelming response, I think it was observing 2 different patterns that were very interesting to me. The one pattern was there were so many women that were reaching out, sending me DMs, commenting, saying that they were in a similar situation, they had chosen life, and they're so thankful. That was the one story I kept seeing over and over and over. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there were all these other women out there that had gotten pregnant from sexual assault or that were facing these unplanned pregnancies and were so happy that they chose life. And it was so powerful to see them just commenting one after the other. They would say, my problem in quotes is now 20 years old. My problem is now 34. My problem is now 3, and just seeing how it's like when Planned Parenthood talks about, oh, this is a problem we can take care of. No, it's not a problem. It's a person, it's a person and a real person that has a name and an identity and is alive and functioning in society. And then the other side of the comments that I was seeing, the common pattern over and over and over, was these women that were commenting and expressing that they did not make that choice and they had chosen to get an abortion and that they were living with decades of regret. And that was so overwhelming for me to see so many women commenting, if only someone had told me I could do it, my child would have been 5 years old or 10 years old or 15 years old. If only someone had responded, if only I had called a pregnancy center like you did and heard those same words, my child would be this. Instead, I'm living with decades of regret, or this is a choice that I think about every second of every day. And just the dichotomy between the two. And it was so staggering to me. There was not a single person who said, I chose life and I regret it. No, but there were hundreds of comments from women saying, I chose to get an abortion and I regret it every second of every day, and I will for the rest of my life. And so seeing just the difference in the two responses was very overwhelming for me. I was not expecting that at all. And I'm really grateful that my video was able to spread so far and have so many women feel comfortable enough to share publicly about both, choosing life as well as the results of choosing abortion.
Would you say that it changed some people's minds, folks who hadn't heard stories like yours, and even in the comments, the other women that came forward and echoed a similar sentiment? Do you think it's safe to say that that changed some people's minds on abortion?
I hope so. I think there are a lot of people that point to, rape as an outlier, like, oh, but we have to keep abortion legal because rape, and they don't realize like the inconsistency in the argument. Yes, rape is absolutely terrible. Yes, we do need to protect women and have their perpetrators be punished, and we do need to provide support for women that are facing these terrible situations and processing trauma and healing from that and all of that. But to use these outliers and as an excuse for all of this other stuff is just, it's not logical. It's not logical. It's not consistent, and it's really disingenuous, I think. And I did have several people reach out saying, I watched your video, you saved my child's life, thank you so much for doing this. And those stories are so powerful. They're like, I knew, they're like, I was thinking about getting an abortion and I saw your video today and I know that God has a reason for it. And so yeah, just seeing those, and that was something that I prayed when I was pregnant. I said, God, one day, give me the strength to tell her story. And I pray that you will use her story to save countless other lives. And so to see that happening now, 9 years later is just really cool, to see. So yeah, sorry, I'm crying. But it is very cool to see women, reaching out and saying that watching my video and hearing my story has had a positive impact on them and giving them the strength to choose life and to carry forward and be brave.
And to Victor's second question about hearts changed, just imagine the possible hearts that change that you will know nothing about. The many women and possibly men who were impacted by your personal story and how it affected their hearts. Until you reach heaven, you'll probably never know about those people. I'd like to ask you both these following questions here, and Nancy, we'll start with you. What would you say to a woman who's pregnant by a sexual assault?
First, it's not that baby's fault. That baby had no choice in how it was conceived. And all life is a gift of God. From all the pain that a woman experiences right after rape, the feelings of uselessness, of being nothing, of being dirty, they're all washed away by the gift of a child who will love you when you can't love yourself, by a smile or a laugh that will remind you every time you are wallowing in your pity that you are there for a purpose, that at the moments when you want to end your own life because you are in such a dark place, that those eyes, that the laughter, that even the tears and those hugs give you a gift that you would have never had. And while people are going to tell you that you're going to, like I said, see the face of your rapist. I never. And I think to this day, people will look at both of my twins and say, they look exactly like you. And that too is a gift from God, that I don't have to see that. I worried about that when maybe as my boy got older that I would see that, and I never have.
What do you see when you look into the faces of those two children?
They were about 10 years old when a family member threatened to tell them, because I hadn't told them yet. They were young. So I had to sit my twins down at 10 years old and tell them that someone had hurt me. And I was so worried about their reaction and the fear that they would have. And instead, these two little people who shouldn't have understood what I said got up and gave me this hug and said, Mom, you've sacrificed so much more than we even realized. I see the strength that I have, that I had to have, pouring into them. I see a love for life that without them I would have never had. And I see a love for the Lord that I would have never found if it wasn't for them.
Angela, let's go back to you. What message do you have to a woman who is pregnant as a result of sexual assault?
I would say the same thing that the pregnancy center lady told me. Sex does not make babies, God does. And for some reason, God is choosing to give you life out of a situation that I know that you think will be the death of you. But you're wrong. It won't be the death of you. And I think that Planned Parenthood, when I spoke to them on the phone, it was that consistent message, like you said, Brad, like, I can't. You know, I can't go to college. I can't pursue my dreams. I can't have a career. I can't tell my parents. I can't face the embarrassment in my school. I can't handle sharing this with my church. I can't handle the judgment. I can't face my child looking like a rapist baby, or people calling my child a rapist baby, which they do. I can't financially provide for my kids. I can't, all those lists of I can't. And if there's one thing I would tell a woman, it is exactly what God tells us. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. You can have a career. You can have this child. You can tell your family. You can find support. You can finish your career. You can financially provide. You can achieve all your dreams and more. And you're going to have an incredible, beautiful human being to share those dreams with. So that would be it. You are infinitely stronger, braver, more powerful than you ever imagined was possible.
Have you had that one-on-one conversation with your daughter yet?
I have not. My daughter actually first started asking about her dad when she was 3. She went to preschool, and on the first day, everybody had to draw pictures of their family. And she was like the only one that didn't have a picture with a dad. And so she came home and was asking me about that. And I promised myself that anytime that she would ask about it, I would always tell her the truth as honestly as I could and as appropriate as I could. So I just said, sweetie, your dad is not a part of our lives because he made some bad choices. And so that was enough for her.
What do you think of when you look into her face?
Oh my goodness, I see her. I just see her. She really is her own unique person. That was another fear that I had too. A lot of people say, oh my gosh, every time you look at her, you're going to see him. And that was a fear that I had too for a long time, but I really don't. Everyone says she's a spitting image of me, that she looks just like me. But when I look at her, I don't even see me really. I see her, the unique human being that God has given me.
Nancy, what is the status of the father of the child today?
Today, I don't know. I do know that he went on to rape again. I do know that at least once it was at gunpoint, and I do know that he spent some time in prison. And that was told to me by a friend. Otherwise, I would have not known because I didn't look and I didn't care. I'm far enough away. I do still have family in Maryland, but it doesn't scare me anymore when I go there. My
Was he
children
punished?
don't want to know his name, so it's not an issue.
Was he punished for his federal offense?
He spent time in prison for the subsequent rapes, yes.
Was he charged as the result of your rape?
I was too afraid to pursue it.
Mm,
I was a
yeah.
single mother. I was just too afraid to pursue it. I wasn't willing, with already 5 children and 2 more on the way, to go through that. I didn't, my PTSD was so bad, I just knew I couldn't handle it.
Understood. Angela, what is the legal status of the man who assaulted you?
So I actually did not press charges either. I had spoken with a police officer about it, and he basically said, in these situations, he said you can prove that something happened, obviously, because you can DNA test the child. But he said what is very difficult to prove is intent. So he said it's basically he said versus she said. And he said that in our state, they make a distinction between the way that the father interacts with the mom and the way that the father interacts with the child. So he said, if you didn't have a child, then and you wanted to pursue this in court, by all means, go for it. But he said that because you have a child, in essence, you would be legally tying yourself to him for the rest of your life because he would have rights as a father to visitation, to time with her, all of these kinds of things. And so the police officer actually advised me against pressing charges in that situation. He said, if you do not want to have him tied, he's like, they would not prevent him from seeing his daughter unless he had done something directly to her, that it didn't matter what he had done to me, but if he had not hurt her, then they couldn't keep him from having access to his daughter. And same thing, I just the state that I was in, I kind of just wanted to move on with my life. I did not want to put myself emotionally through court. I mean, my emotions were all over the place being pregnant, and I just was like, you know what, I just want to move on with my life and not have to be tied to him for the rest of my life, and we'll see how God, works it out.
Here's the last question I have for you both is, and we'll start with you, Nancy. How are you defending life now?
I promised the Lord a long time ago that anytime I was asked to speak that I would. I've spoken on the steps of the State House right before Alabama made that wonderful decision. I have an article in the Epic Times. I speak for fundraisers with King's Home, which is a home for children and women in situations of violence, one that I actually lived at for a while. And I do have, my message has gone out to my church so much that I hear from others very often that they share my story and that now their friends share my story. Just like you said, I may never know, but I pray before I start, if one life could be saved, whether it be a baby or someone to come to the Lord, I don't have to know. That's how I'll measure my success when I'm in heaven, is the people that come and say, because of you, I gave my child life, or because of you, I found the Lord. That's all that matters.
Angela?
Actually, I started on the year anniversary of when I had my original appointment at Planned Parenthood, was the National Day of Prayer, where they go and they pray outside of the Planned Parenthoods, literally on the same day 1 year later. And so
Wow.
that was how I started my kind of reentry into activism, I guess you could say, and advocating for pro-life. It was a very powerful moment for me to stand outside of the pregnancy center that almost took her life, and to stand there with her in my arms and to be able to pray and tell other women that they didn't have to make this choice, that they could choose something different. That was a very powerful moment for me. So that kind of started my, re-entry into working with that. I have volunteered at pregnancy centers. I have taught pregnancy classes in Spanish. I speak Spanish. And so I've taught pregnancy classes for the Hispanic community at local pregnancy centers. I've volunteered, donated. I would donate all of my daughter's old clothes to our local pregnancy center so other moms would be able to have clothes. I've always told the Lord, anytime that God would give me an opportunity to share our story, I would say yes. So I'm hoping that God will be able to take our story. Like you said, you invited me to come here and share, and I was very honored and so grateful to be able to say yes and to share a little bit here with you and with your audience. And so I'm excited to see what God is going to do in the future and how he will use my story and my daughter's story, hopefully, to make a positive difference for other women.
I like that you've repeatedly said our story, not just you, but your daughter also. That's very true. It is our story. Thank you both very much for being part of the program.
Thank you so much
for
for
the
having the
opportunity.
program.
Well, Brad, that conversation was among the most powerful that I can say you and I have had. And that's saying quite a bit, especially considering the stories and the conversations we've heard. But just the importance of this conversation, the bravery of our guests to come on and share their story. I can only imagine the ways that God is using both of them to reach the women who are in their shoes. And maybe they felt like they were alone prior to this conversation. I just pray so much that this program will be a blessing to everyone who heard it. And even people who may think that they're not super involved in this topic, we might be surprised to find out just how many of us know someone, a friend, a family member that might be impacted directly by this. And so I can say that I feel better equipped to have these conversations and to help in whatever way that I possibly can.
And Victor, I've been involved in the movement for nearly 5 decades, and you are always learning. And today was a good example of that, learning to hear and almost experience, if you will, the trauma that was imposed upon these women. And I looked inwardly at that time and felt guilty for all the times that I have kind of discarded the exception of rape in legislation and everything that we do in the movement. It is certainly changing the way I view things, and I'm hopeful that others who listen to this program will also change the way they think about the victims of rape.
Well, I'm sure that it will. And to anyone who wants to get involved, I encourage you to go to our website, lifeissues.org. Join the Life Defenders today. Be a part of our daily work to save babies and promote a culture of life across America. Giving monthly in any amount is a tremendous commitment to the pro-life movement. We can't all be sidewalk counselors. We can't all be directly there on the ground with some of these women. But what we can do is support vital pro-life education like what we've been able to provide today. And that's made possible through monthly donation. Monthly giving helps us reach more persuadable people with this pro-life message. Monthly giving enabled the creation of this very program. Help us do more for the babies by becoming a Life Defender today. Once again, you can easily sign up on our website, lifeissues.org. While you're there, you'll be able to access a catalog of resources that we've put together today. Many of the resources coming from our guests that will help you reach out to people who may need it. Spread this information with your friends, with your family. Once again, that's on lifeissues.org. Be sure to tune in next week for more straight talk on life issues.